I'm going to read a quote to you from a recent Bloomberg article, and I'm going to interview its author in just a moment. But this really sums up nicely the tone of this interview or the structure of this interview. So bear with me. There's a battle underway to win the energy export market between the world's two largest economies. The U.S. wants the world to buy fossil fuels, while China wants to sell the world its clean energy technologies. For now, there is a clear winner, China. Now, that was written by Akshat Rathi just a few days ago, and the title of the piece is China is beating the U.S. in the battle for energy export dominance. So I'm going to have a chat with him. Welcome to the interview, Akshat.
Hey, nice to be back, Markham.
Yeah, I haven't seen you for a while. Well, last time we talked about your book, Climate Capitalism, and I think that probably was in 2024. It's far too long.
It was, I still had a beard.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. You did. Well, look, thank you very much for doing this because I think this is the big story, writ large, which is the energy system is shifting from fossil fuels to clean energy technologies, and the Americans seem to have missed it.
Well, not just seem to have missed it, they're choosing not to see it, is the better way to put it. So we are in a world where China as a whole is exporting on a monthly basis more clean energy technologies than the US as a whole exported natural gas in the form of liquefied natural gas to the world in 2024. So there are some real big shifts happening. It is not something that is sudden. If you were in the US watching this, you knew the numbers rising. But under this administration, the goal is to double down on fossil fuels and to not really build the clean energy industry that the US was looking to build under his predecessor, Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's right. Let's talk about the numbers a little bit because you've got some in your piece. Um, in the first 7 months of 2025, China exported $120 billion US of clean technologies, and the US exported $80 billion of oil and gas. And China's share of that continues to rise. The value of US exports is probably going to fall given the prices of commodities these days. And
Yes,
yeah, and these
compared
numbers
to
have been building for a
2024,
while.
the numbers is already diverging.
Right. So what do those numbers tell us about the rise of one economy and the I don't know, stagnation of another?
Well, at the very basic level, it says the US has fossil fuels and it wants to export fossil fuels. China doesn't have fossil fuels, but it has built an industry trying to first meet its own domestic energy needs, which are enormous. A lot of it does get met by fossil fuels, coal for electricity, but tons of oil and gas that China has to import. And so it wanted to break away from that and it built a clean energy industry that can domestically produce it. But in the process, and this is something China does, when it builds things, it builds it at massive scales because it sees building at scale brings the benefits of scale, which is to lower prices. And as a result, it has now become the world's largest exporter of clean energy goods. So this is solar panels, batteries, wind turbines, electric cars. And this is not just exporting to the rich countries as it used to do in the initial days. Chinese exports are now rising in emerging economies faster and are reaching significant sums already. So we're getting to a place where China now doesn't depend on whether the Europeans have a climate goal or whether the Americans are still committed to climate change. The rest of the world wants clean energy because it is a cheaper form of energy to get.
Yeah, let's talk about that because here at Energy Media, we have a long time ago abandoned the climate lens on the energy system. We could see, like everybody else, we could see the cost curves for all of the key clean energy technologies were coming down, and we believe now that those technologies are on the S curve, have passed the inflection on the S curve. They're now on the hockey stick part of the curve. They are the low cost, high value option in almost every case. So from our point of view, 2, 3 years ago already, we should have been talking about the economics of clean energy, not the climate uh, lens. And you wrote a book about it. So give me your take on that.
Yeah, so my book is called Climate Capitalism, and the goal to show with that book, which was mostly reported between 2017 and 2022, was that there are all these technologies scaling up around the world, and here are the ways in which they can be scaled up. So not just the phenomena of lowering prices of renewable energy, which was happening, but how do you build the structures, the financial structures, the legal structures, the policy structures to enable this not just in China or in the UK where I live, but everywhere in the world. And we are starting to see the fruits of those efforts. And it's worth noting, I am comparing clean energy tech versus fossil fuel exports. They are actually two different things. With fossil fuel exports, you send the oil and the gas to whoever is buying it, or you shove it down their throats because, the trade war is the route to try and get more of your customers in allied countries to buy fossil fuels. They'll burn it, it's gone. Clean energy tech, on the other hand, as Jackson, the CEO of Octopus Energy, told me, is one where you once buy it, continues to generate electricity, produce energy for 2 decades. So very different forms of energy exports too.
Um, About 3 years ago, I interviewed Mike Andrade, who is the CEO of Solar Morgan, located in Toronto. And Mike introduced me to an idea that at that time was new to me, which is energy as a technology versus energy as a commodity. Now, since then, that's become a very common idea. The team at Ember Energy, Kingsmill Bond, and so on, they talk about the shift from combustion, which is very inefficient, to using electric devices and generating electricity through technologies like wind and solar, which is much more efficient. And that is the fundamental difference between the approach that the Americans are taking, sticking with fossil fuel, and Canada. We'll get to Canada in a minute. But that really is the fundamental shift here, isn't it?
It is, and electricity technologies as a whole are not just efficient as you've done. Your electric car is going 4 times the distance for the same amount of energy as your gasoline car, but you can generate them in many, many forms. So solar and wind, yes, of course, they're getting cheaper. But you don't have to just depend on that. You could do hydro, you could do nuclear, you could do geothermal. And if you really wanted to, you could also do gas and coal, because even when it's powered by fossil fuels, your outcome is still lower carbon. So 100% coal-powered grid will still produce transport emissions that are fewer than transport emissions coming from oil.
Yeah, we should talk about this because the oil and gas folks here in Canada, every time you bring up China, their only response is, well, coal, but coal, but coal, but coal. And I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding in the West about what China is doing because clearly, they had 75 to 80% of their power grid was coal not that long ago. Now they're building out the clean energy side, wind, solar, they're doing hydro, they're doing some more nuclear. So they're doing that and they're building coal plants that are high efficiency. And the goal down the road is to have 100% clean energy system with thermal as a backup. And they brought in a capacity market already to pay for that idle capacity. And I think we've missed that. We keep focusing on the number of plants or the percentage of coal, and we miss their strategy. Would you agree or disagree?
Well, it's not so much that we miss it. I think it's hard to grasp your head around the numbers. So, as of last year, as of end of 2024, China produces 3 times as much electricity as the US does. But as a percentage of that electricity, China now has more solar and wind and hydro than the US does. So the Chinese grid is actually not cleaner yet because it does burn coal, plenty of it, but just percentage of renewables now, China has more in its grid than the US does. And you can do a US-China story in two largest powers. There's plenty to be able to tell the world about it. But take the global story. The first half of 2025 saw just renewables, solar, wind, and hydro mostly, be more in electricity generation than coal. So coal used to be number one globally if you took the average, 33% or so. Renewables now are at 34%.
You know, a couple of times I've said that, the US missed it, the West missed it. And really what I'm talking about, Akshat, is Canada missed it. Because it's astonishing here. And for our viewers, we should note that Canada is the fourth largest producer of oil in the world and the fifth largest producer of gas. Canada is a big fossil fuel producer, and almost all of it gets exported. So what happens here is important. And I would say, and I've had Canadian experts on here who have agreed that Canada has missed it. Our narrative, our conversation has been so dominated by the OPEC view of the future, with rising demand for oil and gas out to well beyond 2050, that we have simply had blinders on, and we just only see what we want to see. But is there any indication that other parts of the world, like Europe, for example, does Europe get it?
Well, parts of Europe get it. I mean, you could take the example that Canada could be Norway, it could be exporting oil and gas that Norway does, but then look domestically and actually completely transform its economy on electrification. So, like Canada, Norway has a very clean grid. So Canada still has some fossil fuels in its grid. The Norway grid is almost all hydropower. But the Canadian grid is pretty clean too, right? It's got nuclear, it's got hydro. And what Norway has done is now, as of 2025, 100% electric car sales. You're not allowed to sell a fossil fuel car. And that has happened very swiftly. And as a result, Norway's oil consumption is starting to fall. Domestic oil consumption is starting to fall. If you really only cared about money and nothing else, you would still do what Norway did because you would then become the power that you are, the fourth largest oil and gas exporter, continue to do that, gain revenue, but also become a more efficient economy because you are running on electricity that is also very clean.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that gets missed is, I mean, we say here that electricity is the foundation of the 21st century economy. And and not necessarily electricity generated by gas and coal. Akshat, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I look forward to our next one, which is going to be about how all of this fits into geopolitics. Thank you very much for this.
Thanks, Markham.